Hey guys, tonight we step quietly into a world of dust, discipline, and dried paint, where the air smells of linseed oil and regret. You're about to become an apprentice in a Renaissance artist's studio. Don't smile yet. This isn't one of those romantic scenes with chubby angels and soft lighting. It's more sweat, sore feet, and spoiled egg tempera. You're 12, maybe 13. You don't get a choice in the matter. Your father knows a guy who knows a guy. And suddenly, here you are. A tiny, underfed human sacrifice to the gods of art and unpaid labor. The workshop door creaks open like it's warning you. Inside, chaos and color? Yes. But also a pungent onion soup meets sheep fat smell that hits you like betrayal. Wood shavings cover the floor. Canvas scraps hang from beams. A boy somewhere is sobbing softly while scrubbing what may or may not be a goat skull. Apprentice? Someone barks from behind an easel. You nod. Congratulations. You exist now, but only as a pair of hands and a set of lungs for breathing in fumes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments. Where are you listening from? And what time is it there? Is the weather as moody as this workshop? I'd love to know. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're led to a corner that might generously be called your living quarters. There's a bundle of straw on the floor, a slanted wooden bench, and a wool blanket that smells like it once comforted a plague victim. Your new roommate? A large, sullen cat with half a tail and definite authority over you. You're expected to sleep here, eat here, and somehow not ruin anything. There's no privacy, no pillow. And the walls are thin enough that you can hear every cough, every footstep, every catastrophic sneeze that might knock over an oil jar. Your master, who you will only ever refer to as Maestro, doesn't speak much. When he does, it's in a kind of muttered poetry that somehow contains both insult and command. Today, he sizes you up, squints, and mutters something about bony fingers and cheap help. Fun fact, apprentices weren't paid. Nope, you or your family actually paid the master to take you in. Historians still argue whether this system was more about training or free labor. You're leaning heavily toward the latter. Your first task? Sweeping. Not with a broom, though. Number. You're handed a bundle of dried lavender tied to a stick. Why? Apparently, the smell calms the oils. You're skeptical. But the real reason is probably because Maestro saw it once in Florence and decided it looked fancy. Lunch is boiled barley with what might be turnip. You're not sure. You eat anyway. Hunger does things to a person. You start tasting hope where there's only mold. As the hours stretch, you observe. The studio is both terrifying and incredible. High ceilings, skylights, a dozen half-finished canvases, angels with no wings, saints with haunting, empty eyes. One looks like he's judging your posture. You straighten up. There are older apprentices, too. Teenagers who walk with that knowing exhaustion, their hands stained red from iron oxide. They nod at you with vague pity. You'll learn, their eyes say, or you'll quit, or cry. Spoiler, you'll do both. Your first night passes in a blur of cold drafts and a small rat chewing something suspicious near your head. You dream of soft pillows and warm bread. You wake up to Maestro yelling about someone misplacing the lapis lazuli. You don't even know what that is yet, but you instinctively start apologizing. And still, something tugs at you. Despite the hunger, the smells, the bruised ego, there's magic here. You watch as a boy mixes colors until they sing. You watch as a girl. Yes, sometimes girls made it in. Etches a figure so real you blink. Still, don't get too inspired. The rules are iron. The expectations are worse. And the journey ahead? Well, you probably won't survive this. Morning doesn't greet you. It kicks you in the ribs. Someone, probably that older apprentice with the lopsided haircut, nudges you with a foot and mutters, "Up." Firewood. Your eyes sting from smoke that hasn't even started yet, and your legs ache from a straw mattress that offers about as much support as a bag of potatoes. You trudge outside into the cold gray of dawn, hands numb, breath visible in little gasps. A pile of wood sits near the back wall. It's your job to carry it inside, all of it, without dropping anything, while not letting the chickens escape, or the cat, or knocking over the fresco boards stacked nearby. One apprentice once did that. He disappeared. The fireplace crackles to life eventually, more smoke than flame. It's barely enough to warm the tips of your fingers, but it's something. You're allowed a cup of watered wine and a chunk of bread. No butter, not even salt, just bread, with the texture of sandstone. Then it's chore time. Again. You scrub floors with a rag soaked in vinegar and water. You empty chamber pots, because yes, no plumbing here. You clean brushes left out overnight, stiff with dried pigment that feels like it was forged by volcanoes. You carry buckets of water from a nearby fountain, uphill, barefoot, while being lectured about your posture by someone who hasn't moved from his stool in 3 hours. And still, you haven't touched a brush. You've been here a week, maybe 2. Days blur. Time becomes a mixture of scrubbing and squinting and sneezing from the dust kicked up by powdered chalk. No one teaches you anything. You're expected to observe, to absorb by osmosis, like a sponge, a tired, unpaid sponge. Eventually, they let you assist in stretching a canvas. It's just rabbit glue and linen, but you treat it like treasure. Your hands tremble as you pull the fabric taut across the wooden frame, trying not to wrinkle it or bleed on it. You fail. A tiny drop of blood smears the corner. You cover it with your sleeve and pretend it never happened. Maestro walks by, looks at the canvas, sniffs once, and mutters something about tight enough to strangle a bishop. You're not sure if it's praise. You smile anyway. It's the closest you've come to approval in days. Fun fact: Renaissance artists didn't always paint on canvas. Wood panels were just as common, and tempera was the preferred medium for a long time. You'll learn to sand poplar until your arms go numb. You'll prime boards with gesso so many times your dreams will turn white and chalky. And then, finally, you're assigned your first real studio task: mixing pigment. Sounds glamorous, right? It's not. You're handed a mortar and pestle, a chunk of red ochre, and a bowl of egg yolks. Your job? Grind the pigment until it's fine as dust, then stir it into the yolk, slowly, until it becomes smooth, thick, and rich. And oh, by the way, don't let it clump, curdle, or dry out too fast. Because if it does, you've just ruined a day's worth of expensive materials and someone else's painting. Egg tempera smells worse than you'd think, especially after 2 hours. And it dries so quickly that if you blink too long, it's already too late. One of the older apprentices leans over your shoulder and whispers, "Don't spill it." Last kid who did got sent to the tanner's yard. You laugh until you realize he's not joking. And the brushes? They're made from pig hair. Not like from the pig. All of the pig. You once watched a senior apprentice pull hairs straight from a hog's hide. The brush he made still smelled faintly of barn. He named it Gertrude. You're not sure why. You're too afraid to ask. Your nights are no better. You collapse onto your straw pile, muscles aching, hands stained from ochre and charcoal. Your fingernails are black with grime. Your back itches from drying glue. But as you lay there, staring at the rafters and listening to the familiar symphony of coughs, rats, and midnight chamber pot clinks, something inside you hums. Maybe it's pride. Maybe it's fever. Who can say? What you do know is this. Slowly, painfully, you are becoming part of the strange, paint-splattered organism called the studio. You know which floorboards creak, which brushes are secretly cursed, and which apprentice sings to himself while carving angels. And despite everything, despite the blister on your thumb and the weird rash on your elbow, you can't help but glance at Maestro's work in progress and think, one day, that could be me. Historians still debate whether apprentices ever really liked their jobs or just tolerated them out of obligation. But you're starting to wonder if maybe you're a little bit in love with this chaos. Just don't tell anyone. Not yet. You wake up to a noise that sounds like someone strangling a goose. It's not a goose. It's Lorenzo, the red-haired apprentice, retching over a bucket because he inhaled too much orpiment yesterday. That's a bright yellow pigment made with arsenic. Yes, arsenic. Surprise. You sit up slowly, rubbing sleep from your eyes and wondering if you'll ever have clear fingernails again. The answer is probably no. You haven't touched soap in 3 days, and your hands look like you've just crawled out of a chimney. Today's task, prepare more pigments, but this time you're working with blues. Real blues. Expensive blues. Lapis lazuli, the stuff of saints' robes and the Virgin Mary's cloak. It comes in tiny chunks, mined in Afghanistan, priced like powdered sapphire. You don't get to touch that yet. Instead, they give you azurite. It's cheaper and smells like copper pennies when ground. You spend 3 hours hunched over a slab of marble, grinding it in circular motions. Clockwise, never counterclockwise. Don't ask why, just do it. Your back starts to protest around hour 2, but no one stops for breaks. One boy once asked for 5 minutes to stretch, and the look Maestro gave him could have curdled milk. You're allowed to add a few drops of water and egg yolk to the pigment paste. The mixture is oddly beautiful, glossy, smooth, and rich like melted sapphire. And then it hits you. The smell. It's not the pigment, it's the egg. The raw, slightly off-smelling egg yolk you've just stirred for the 8th time today. It's like someone microwaved an omelet in a cathedral. You wrinkle your nose, but you don't complain. Complaining earns you wood shavings in your shoes, or a brush mysteriously cut in half. Later in the morning, you're sent to refill the studio's oil supply. That means walking across the square to the apothecary shop, carrying a ceramic jug the size of your torso. The oil? Linseed. Sticky, amber, and prone to leaking. You already have 1 foot coated in it before you even leave the studio. At the apothecary's, you wait behind a noblewoman buying rose water, and a monk asking, somewhat nervously, for powdered rhino horn. You keep your head down. You've learned that apprentices are invisible unless they're in the way. The walk back is worse. The jug leaks. Your hands are slick. A dog follows you for 5 blocks, convinced you're holding something edible. You aren't. Once back in the studio, Maestro finally calls on you directly. His words, "Boy, stir this, slowly, or I'll know." This is a mixture of oil, pigment, and some mysterious ingredient that looks like tree sap, but might actually be boiled bones. You stir, You sweat. You pretend you understand what's happening. You don't, but you look like you do, which is half the battle. Fun fact, painters often added odd materials to their mixes. Garlic, honey, vinegar, even urine. Yes, human urine. Collected fresh, still warm. Some believed it made pigments more vibrant. Historians still argue whether this was superstition, science, or just a cruel joke played on apprentices. You're beginning to suspect it's the latter. Lunch is lentil mush, with a crust of bread so hard you consider using it to sand a panel. You eat anyway. Hunger is a persuasive seasoning. After the meal, you're allowed to observe Maestro painting. He doesn't speak. He doesn't blink. His brush glides with supernatural precision. You try not to breathe too loudly. At one point, he wipes his brush on your sleeve without looking. You don't even flinch. You study the technique, the layering, the way he builds light with feathered strokes. You whisper questions to yourself like prayers. How does he blend so smoothly? Why that angle? What color is that shadow? And then he says it. Tomorrow, you grind the cinnabar. Your heart drops. Cinnabar. Mercury sulfide. Bright red. And deadly if inhaled. You nod politely while mentally writing your will. So far, it reads, to the cat, I leave my straw mat and half a bread crust. That night, sleep eludes you. You lie awake listening to the wind, rattle shutters, and wondering how many apprentices accidentally poisoned themselves before they could finish a single painting. Probably more than a few. Historians still debate whether these dangerous materials were fully understood or whether the masters just didn't care. Either way, you now suspect every breathtaking Renaissance masterpiece came at the cost of at least one dizzy teenager dry heaving in a corner. Still, that blue you mixed earlier, the one that shimmered under candlelight, you remember that blue, and you wonder if someday someone might remember you. You don't even make it to breakfast before Maestro starts yelling. Someone has moved the reference sketch, a large charcoal drawing pinned to the wall, gone, or crooked, or smudged. It doesn't really matter which. Maestro's voice booms through the studio like a church bell that's angry it had to wake up. Everyone freezes. You hold your breath. You didn't touch it. You swear you didn't. Still, his eyes land on you. You, new boy, were you near the north wall yesterday? You nod slowly. Technically, you were near it. Scraping dried paint off a board, but you didn't touch the sketch. That doesn't seem to matter now. He stares for a moment, then waves his hand as if dismissing a fart. Fix it. Redraw the hand. If you ruin it, don't come back. No pressure. You approach the wall. The sketch is of Saint Sebastian, a full figure study, complete with tortured expression and multiple arrows sticking out of his torso like he's an unlucky hedgehog. The hand Maestro refers to? It's about 3 inches wide and terrifyingly lifelike. You reach for a stick of charcoal, your own hand trembling. This is your first real line. If you mess it up, it'll be visible to every patron, every student, every scowling senior apprentice in the room. Your lines are shaky. Too light at first, then too dark. You erase and smear. Someone coughs behind you. You imagine laughter, judgment, maybe even your father shaking his head from miles away. Then, somehow, you do it. The curve of the thumb, the shadow along the knuckle. It's not perfect, but it looks like a hand, a real one, the kind that might pray or paint, or, if necessary, slap an apprentice into next week. Maestro walks by, glances at the sketch, and says nothing, which, in this studio, is the highest praise imaginable. From that moment, things shift slightly. You're still at the bottom of the hierarchy, sure, but now people know your name. You're asked to assist with tracing outlines for a panel commission. A saint again, of course. Always saints. You've never seen so many variations of glowing men in robes. And while you're finally drawing, let's talk about tracing. Yes, tracing. Renaissance artists often use something called a cartoon, a full-scale preparatory drawing, to transfer designs onto panels or walls. They'd poke tiny holes along the outlines, then dust them with charcoal dust through a pouch. When the paper was lifted, the design was there, like magic. Dirty, dusty magic. You help with this process. You're the one tapping the pouch, gently, evenly, praying not to sneeze. Because if you sneeze and shift the paper, the whole image is ruined. One apprentice once did that. He now works in a tannery. You're learning the rhythms now. The brush cleaning, the pigment preparation, the way the studio shifts its energy depending on whether a commission is in progress or a patron is due for a visit. Those are the worst days. You have to look like you're painting, even if all you're doing is pretending to add highlights to an already finished ear. And speaking of ears, yesterday, you found one. Not a real ear, a wax model. It was tucked in a drawer next to a sculpted nose and an unsettlingly realistic eyeball. Welcome to Anatomical Studies, Renaissance Edition. Artists didn't always get access to cadavers, so they made models. Some of them were good, some were less good. One ear looked like it had melted off the side of a candle. Fun fact, many artists trained in sculpture, anatomy, and even engineering. Leonardo da Vinci sketched flying machines. Michelangelo dissected corpses. You, however, are just trying to survive your third week without fainting in front of the pigment grinder. By midday, Maestro is working on a large altarpiece. You're asked to assist, not with the central figures. He guards those like a dragon guards gold, but with the background. You're handed a brush and told to fill in the sky. You nod, terrified. You dip the brush in ultramarine. Your hand hovers over the wood. Then you touch it. The color blooms. Smooth. Even. Too even. Maestro glances over and frowns. It's a sky, not a wall. Loosen your hand. Clouds, fool, clouds. You try again. Lighter touch. Dabbing. Feathering. You blend in a wisp of white, a little gray, smudging it just right. You step back. It's okay. Maestro grunts. He keeps painting. Again, the highest of praises. But your victory is short-lived. As you clean your tools, you knock over a jar of varnish. It spills across the floor, sticky and gleaming like liquid amber. An older apprentice sees and mutters, "You're dead." Maestro doesn't yell. He just sighs. The disappointment is worse than screaming. He points toward the rear storage room. You know what's coming? Punishment. You're assigned to inventory, which means 3 hours in a dark, moldy room full of canvases that smell like regret and fermented beeswax. You count brushes, label oil jars, organize sketches that crumble at your touch. At one point, you find a drawing of a nude figure with a beard and an expression of total despair. It looks uncannily like your reflection. Historians still argue whether punishment in Renaissance workshops was disciplinary or educational. Some claim the tasks were designed to teach humility. Others believe they were simply unpleasant enough to prevent repeat offenses. You lean toward the latter. Still, as you finish reorganizing and step back into the afternoon light, something's changed. You've survived another day, and somehow you're starting to understand that this chaos, exhaustion, and occasional moment of beauty isn't just training. It's the beginning of mastery. You are finally finally allowed to hold a proper brush. Not just for mixing, not for cleaning, for painting. Sort of. You're not painting anything new. You're copying. And not even an entire painting. Just a hand. Again. Your life is beginning to feel like a cycle of hands. Drawing them, redrawing them, failing at drawing them. The master gives you a sketch, tapes it to a panel, and grunts. Copy that. Match the weight. Match the line. Match the breath. You nod, though you're not entirely sure how a line breathes. You'll figure it out. Hours pass. Your first few strokes are stiff, nervous. But over time, your wrist loosens. Your hand starts to move with rhythm. You get lost in the contour of the fingers, the softness of the palm, the subtle dip where the wrist begins. You start to think, maybe you're getting good at this. And then, an older apprentice passes behind you and says, too stiff. It looks like it died twice. Confidence, shattered. Brush, shaking. You glare at the panel, willing it to improve through sheer force of suffering. This is your life now. Endless copying. You trace and replicate until your fingers cramp. Eyes blur. You start dreaming about wrists and knuckles. You sketch hands into the grime on the window pane just for practice. And the worst part? You're not even copying the master's work yet. You're copying copies of copies, like painting through a game of historical telephone. Somewhere between the original and your current attempt, the life has leached out. You try to paint it back in, but it resists you like an old mule with artistic standards. Still, you persist. Fun fact, copying was essential in Renaissance studios. It wasn't just busy work. It was how you absorbed style, by mimicry. How to shade like Raphael. How to curve like Botticelli. Even how to hide mistakes under a layer of carefully feathered glaze. Historians argue whether this stifled creativity or cultivated discipline. The answer is probably yes. And while you copy hands by candlelight, the master is working on a commission for a local church. It's a triptych, 3 panels featuring biblical scenes, saints, and one very awkward cherub who might just be based on Lorenzo. The studio hums with quiet tension. Everyone knows this is important. When a commission like this comes through, it pays everyone's bread. Well, everyone except you. Remember, apprentices don't get paid. You're still here for education, which today includes cleaning a palette covered in lead white. Again, you try not to think too hard about how often your fingers go numb after handling it. You notice the master's technique, the way he layers light over shadow, the way he draws the eye to the center of the panel using color, not just subject. His brushwork is so fine, it feels like he's painting with breath, not bristles. One day, you want that level of mastery. But today, you're still trying not to smear charcoal on your nose while shading the same hand you've drawn 6 times this week. Eventually, your copies improve. Maestro stops correcting every line. He lets you keep them. You stack them like badges of honor. A gallery of hands in various emotional states. One looks pensive. One looks like it just got news about taxes. One looks mildly constipated. You're proud of them all. And then, disaster. You're given the chance to paint a small object in the corner of an in-progress canvas. Just a vase. Simple, round, reflective. The kind of thing no one notices, unless you mess it up. You mess it up. The shadow is off. The highlights are too bright. It looks like it's floating, or melting, or both. You hear a sharp intake of breath behind you. Maestro says nothing. He just steps in, takes your brush, and with 2 gentle strokes, fixes it. Not just repairs it, perfects it. The vase suddenly has weight. It belongs. It breathes. You feel your stomach sink, but not from shame, from awe. That's the difference. 2 strokes. That's all it took. You go to bed thinking about those 2 strokes. The angle, the pressure, the restraint. That night, you try to mimic them on your pillow with your finger. You fail, but you're learning. The next morning, you try again. Another corner element. This time, a tiny apple on a windowsill. You paint it with care. Mind the shadows. Mind the curve. Think about breath. When you're done, Maestro walks by, glances, says nothing, which is becoming your favorite form of feedback. Your brush hand is cramping. Your eyes are strained. But your heart, somehow, feels full. You're still copying, but something in those copies is becoming yours. It starts with a small squeal. Someone in the back room knocks over a jar of gold leaf, and the entire studio collectively gasps like they just saw a priceless relic fall into a well. Gold leaf, actual gold, hammered thin as dragonfly wings, is expensive, delicate, impossible to clean up once it touches the floor. One gust of wind, and it's everywhere. On your sleeves, your shoes, your teeth, probably. The apprentice who dropped it looks pale, like he's about to cry. Maestro doesn't yell. He just crosses the room slowly, kneels beside the mess, and picks up a single fluttering square with the tenderness of someone lifting a dying butterfly. Then he turns to the rest of you. Never waste gold, never rush glue, and never breathe with your mouth open while gilding. You've just entered the world of decorative work, and today's lesson is about humility and sticky fingers. Your job is to prepare the base, called bowl, a reddish clay mixed with glue, brushed onto raised details where the gold will go. It dries fast and smells vaguely like wet dog. You use a squirrel hair brush and pretend not to gag. Then comes the gilding. You watch as another apprentice uses a special knife to cut the gold leaf, holds his breath, and uses a padded tool called a gilder's tip to lift the paper-thin sheet onto the sticky bowl. It flutters like it's trying to escape back into heaven. His hands tremble. The gold rips. A collective groan. Again, Maestro says, "You're not even touching the gold yet. You're still learning to breathe like a monk during a vow of silence." One wrong exhale, and the entire panel turns into a disco accident. Fun fact, gold leaf has been used since antiquity, but Renaissance artists elevated it to divine levels, using it in halos, borders, even details on saints' robes. Some studios guarded their gilding formulas like state secrets. Your fingers itch to try it, but first, you're assigned to make glue. Again. This time, it's gesso sodal, the superfine version. It requires boiling down hide glue, mixing it with chalk, and filtering it through linen. It smells like wet bones and stale promises. You stir it slowly over a fire until it thickens, then pour it through cloth. It drips, stretches, cools, and congeals into something the consistency of regret. Your reward? You're allowed to help polish a gold detail that's already dry. You use an agate stone, smooth as glass, to burnish the gold until it gleams like morning sunlight. Your reflection blinks back at you, shiny, smudged, startled. For one glorious moment, you feel powerful. Then you sneeze, right into the next square of unset gold leaf. It folds, crumples, bonds to your wrist. A senior apprentice glares at you like you just slapped a bishop. You whisper, "Sorry," and don't breathe again for 10 minutes. Maestro doesn't even look up. He just says, "Next time, sneeze into the bucket." You nod. You don't know which bucket he means. You sneeze anyway. into your sleeve this time. Later, you're tasked with laying gold leaf onto a panel border. Just one line. One sacred, terrifying, shimmering line. You hold the gilder's tip like it's made of spun glass. The gold floats, lands, clings. You tap it gently. Smooth it. It sticks. You don't breathe. You press the next section. Align the edge. Tap again. It holds. You did it. You just gilded something. And no one died. Historians still argue whether apprentices were truly trusted with gold leaf or just let near it under threat of exile. Either way, the look Lorenzo gives you afterward, half resentment, half respect, tells you this moment matters. Later that evening, you're allowed to help with an illuminated manuscript being prepared for a visiting cleric. It's just a single page, but it's covered in vines, flowers, miniature faces, and gold accents so fine they look like sunlight trapped in ink. You mix paints. You pass brushes. You lean closer and closer to see how the master adds a single glint to the eye of a saint not much bigger than your fingernail. He doesn't blink. Neither do you. And then, because fate enjoys balance, you drop your brush into the pigment jar. The red one, the expensive one. It splashes. Paint hits the border. The cleric's face is now spattered with crimson. Everyone freezes. You feel your soul leave your body. Maestro looks up. His eyes scan the damage. Then he sighs. Make it a martyr. You stare. He repeats, make it a martyr. So, you add a tiny slash to the side of the robe. A drop of blood here. A sorrowful expression there. You've just accidentally created Saint something of somewhere, slain for their unwavering belief in ink quality. You don't question it. Maestro nods once. The page is saved. Later, as you clean your brushes, you feel a quiet pride swelling in your chest. Not because you nailed the gilding, not because you turned a mess into a miracle, but because you're starting to belong here. Even your mistakes are starting to feel like part of the process. Art isn't just skill. It's problem solving. It's adapting. It's sneezing on gold leaf and turning failure into flourishes. You fall asleep that night with sticky fingers, sore eyes, and a faint shimmer still clinging to your sleeve. In the dim light of the studio, surrounded by drying panels and slumbering apprentices, you smile. You might be poor. You might be tired. But tonight, you sparkle. The morning air is unusually thick. Not with fog, though that wouldn't be a surprise, but with fumes. Heavy, metallic, almost sweet in the worst way. You step into the workshop and instantly gag. Someone's opened the cinnabar. It's your turn today. The others keep their distance, even Lorenzo, who normally hovers near you like a judgmental mosquito. You sit down with the mortar and pestle and stare at the chunk of bright red cinnabar, which looks beautiful and deadly all at once, like crushed rubies or powdered warning signs. You take a breath through your mouth and begin grinding. Slow, circular motions. Dust starts to rise. You try not to inhale. You've tied a cloth around your face, but it does about as much as a screen door against a flood. Your hands begin to tingle, not in a poetic way, in a maybe I'm being poisoned way. Cinnabar, after all, is mercury sulfide. Gorgeous, vibrant, and catastrophically toxic. Historians still argue whether Renaissance artists fully understood the dangers or simply ignored them in favor of beauty. Based on today's evidence, you're guessing. Probably a mix of both. You grind for hours. The color is glorious, intense, like the inside of a volcano. You add a few drops of water and mix it into a silky paste. It clings to the bowl like melted fire. Someone claps behind you. Not applause, more like a warning. You turn. It's the master. He nods once toward the large panel by the front window. It's the altarpiece again. The martyrdom of St. Catherine this time. Dramatic, vivid, and, lucky you, full of red robes. You'll lay the undercoat. You nod. No words. Just relief. You've graduated from practice boards and background apples to actual foreground cloth. It's not a face, not even a foot, but it's part of a saint's robe, and it's all yours. You take a smaller brush, dip it into your freshly made cinnabar, and gently lay the first stroke across the panel. The red spreads smoothly, vivid and loud, like a trumpet note in a silent cathedral. You keep going. Careful curves, slight pressure, following the folds of the robe like you're tracing the rhythm of a song only you can hear. The fumes are dizzying. You sway. Lorenzo nudges a stool behind your knees so you don't collapse. A silent thank you passes between you. After the undercoat is done, you switch to glazing. Thin layers, each one deepening the red, giving it life and dimension. You can't stop staring. It's the first time something you've painted belongs on a finished piece. Later, while cleaning your brush, you overhear two apprentices whispering. "I heard Bernardino got sick from cinnabar," one says. "Yeah," the other mutters. His teeth turn black. You discreetly touch your teeth. Still there, still white. For now. The rest of the day is quieter. You're assigned to sketch hands again. You don't mind anymore. Hands are familiar. Hands are friends. You draw them resting, praying, grasping, pointing. One even holding a lemon, for some reason. You don't ask. While you work, a pigeon crashes into the skylight. Everyone jumps. Paint spills. Someone screams. You blink up at the ceiling. The pigeon seems fine. It flutters away with the calm of a bird who knows it owns the world. The master doesn't react. He simply mutters, "We need shutters," and returns to his painting. The room smells like turpentine, sweat, and red pigment. Your clothes are permanently stained. Your knuckles are raw. Your nose won't stop running, probably from the mercury. And yet, there's something about today. The color, the rhythm, the quiet nod of the master as he passed your section that makes it feel worth it. That evening, you stay behind to help close the shutters. The last light of the day hits your red robe section, making it glow. It looks good. Not perfect. Not quite masterful. But good. You stare at it a long time. Not because you're proud. Well, okay, maybe a little. But because you're shocked it came from you. An apprentice. A kid with straw in his hair and permanent paint on his wrists. Fun fact. Some of the most famous Renaissance works we adore today, altarpieces, portraits, frescoes, contain the unseen labor of dozens of apprentices, their brushwork, their sweat, sometimes even their initials, hidden in shadows or stitched into robes. You wonder if anyone will ever look at this painting and think, who did that robe? They won't know your name, but they might see the color. And maybe that's enough. You leave the workshop with red-stained fingertips and lungs that feel a little heavier than before. But your step is lighter. You've painted something real today, and it's still there, hanging in the golden light, waiting for the next layer. The first crack echoes like a curse. A thin, unmistakable snap rings out from across the room, followed by a slow, spiraling silence. Every apprentice freezes. You're holding a brush, mid-air, stuck in that awkward limbo where instinct tells you not to breathe. Then someone says the words no one ever wants to hear in a Renaissance studio. The tile broke. You rush over with the others. One of the fresco panels, wet plaster on wood, has fractured, not across a background cloud, or a saint's slipper, or some decorative foliage. Number right, across the Virgin Mary's face. She now looks like she's mid-earthquake. The apprentice who did it, a boy named Matteo, stares in horror. He hadn't set the board flat. Moisture warped it overnight. The plaster cracked like drying mud. His career might have cracked with it. Maestro stands before the damaged panel and breathes deeply. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The studio holds its collective breath. Then he says, "Start over." No rage, no threats, just those two words, the kind that slice more cleanly than any insult. Matteo nods and carries the ruined panel away like a coffin. That afternoon, you're given a different task. Less dangerous, maybe, but no less stressful. You're assigned to prep intonaco, the final smooth layer of plaster used for frescoes. This is the wet stuff the master paints directly onto. It has to be flawless. If it dries too quickly, the pigment won't bind. Too slowly, and the design will bleed. You mix lime and sand, carefully, slowly. The texture should be like thick cream, but slightly grittier, like spreading warm yogurt on a stone wall. You deliver it to the wall section for tomorrow's painting. The senior apprentice smooths it with a trowel, then steps back and frowns. "It'll do," he mutters. That's as close as anyone gets to great job around here. You spend the rest of the day learning the math of fresco work. You didn't sign up for math, but here it is. Each section of plaster, a giornata, must be small enough to finish painting in one day. That's why frescoes are done in pieces. A saint's robe one day, a tree the next, a toe on Thursday. Fun fact, if you look closely at old frescoes, you can sometimes spot the borders between days. Tiny seams, like brushstroke timestamps. That night, the older apprentices gather near the fire, murmuring about contracts. Lorenzo says the master once lost a commission because he cracked a panel just before delivery. Apparently, the client demanded his payment back, in goats. You're not sure if that's true, but goats seem plausible. Most things in this studio could be paid in goats. The next morning, you're allowed to help transfer a drawing onto fresh plaster using the Spalvero method. Remember the dusting process from earlier? The design is pricked, lined up, patted gently with charcoal dust through a cloth pouch. When the paper is removed, faint outlines remain. You breathe slowly, evenly, as you tap the charcoal. Puff, puff, tap. Every stroke leaves a whisper of an image. A hand, a foot, a curling vine. One mistake could ruin the whole day's plaster. Halfway through, the pouch tears. Charcoal dumps across the panel. You stare in horror at what now looks like a smudged shadow monster rampaging through the Holy Family. Maestro walks in. He doesn't speak, just walks over, runs his hand across the damage, and says, "Clean it. Work backward." So you do. You brush gently. You reapply. You learn that erasing charcoal from damp plaster is like trying to edit a letter while it's still being written in ink. Somehow, by the end of the hour, the image is saved. Mostly. Maybe the donkey's eyes are a little intense now, but otherwise, acceptable. That afternoon, as you help grind green earth pigment for the landscape section, you notice your hands have developed permanent grooves. Little valleys of pressure from weeks of grinding, sanding, scrubbing. Your fingers are stronger. Your grip is surer. You're even starting to identify pigments by smell. Lead tin yellow, burnt umber, verdigris, earthy, sour, sharp. You've also started to hear the sounds of the studio differently. The soft crackle of egg tempera drying, the scratch of charcoal across a board, the distinct clink of a dropped palette knife, followed by a chorus of groans. Later that evening, a patron visits. You hate patron days. Everything must sparkle. Every canvas turned just so. Apprentices lined up like decorative columns. You're handed a cloth and told to dust the saints' halos. You try not to think about how many times you've painted under extreme pressure. Now you're cleaning under it too. The patron walks through with an air of exaggerated boredom. He's dressed like a tapestry came to life. Feathers, lace, a hat that could shelter a family of pigeons. He gestures vaguely at the altarpiece and says, more gold. Maestro's jaw tightens. Yes, my lord, he replies, voice smooth as varnish. After the man leaves, the studio is silent for a long time. Then Maestro mutters, fool's gold for a fool's taste. You hide a smile. Historians still debate how much creative freedom artists actually had under patronage. Some argue the master could push back. Others say the gold purse always won. All you know is that the patron's exit brings relief. You go back to your brushwork, quiet, focused. Later that night, after the lamps are out and the apprentices are curled on mats and benches, you stare at the ceiling and think about the cracked plaster, the sticky gilding, the smudged charcoal, the whispered jokes, and you realize something strange. You're not afraid anymore. You're still exhausted, still unpaid, still regularly splattered with materials that might be shortening your lifespan. But you're no longer afraid. Not of failure, not of messes, not even of the master. Well, a little afraid of the master, but mostly, you're starting to feel like you belong. And in a world built on saints and suffering, that's no small miracle. You paint a tree today, not a glorious center stage tree that towers over the landscape and shelters doves in rays of golden light. Number your tree is in the background, near the edge of a panel, barely visible behind a saint's elbow. Still, it's your tree. You start with a thin brush and muted green pigments, terre verte and verdigris, both gently toxic, as usual. The bark is done in burnt umber, mixed with just enough black to give it age. You don't just paint a tree, you suggest it. Twist the branches subtly. Make the trunk lean like it grew with purpose. A tree that watched centuries pass and still kept standing. It's a quiet sort of triumph. You step back. No one notices. But you notice. And sometimes, that's enough. The day continues, and your hands move from painting to prep work again. You help glue down a section of canvas onto a wooden panel using rabbit skin glue. It smells exactly like it sounds, wet fur and boiled regret. The glue sets fast, so your hands must be precise. It wrinkles once. You smooth it. It warps slightly. You press it flat with a board and a prayer. Maestro walks by and grunts. Better. You allow yourself a smile. It's the kind of compliment that could start a religion in this place. During the midday meal, the apprentices gather around the stew pot. It's turnips again, or radishes, something white and watery. You eat without tasting, already thinking about pigments and drying times. Lorenzo leans over and mutters, "Your tree's leaning the wrong way." You raise an eyebrow. So's your nose. He smirks. A truce of sorts. This is how friendships are born in the studio. Through sarcasm, side eyes, and shared brushes. The afternoon brings a small commission. A decorative border for a merchant's family crest. It's boring work, full of repetitive patterns and gold flourishes that hurt your wrist. But it's a paying job, which means the studio is humming with forced cheer. Even the master whistles. Once. You're assigned to paint the leaves that spiral around the crest, repeating, curling, twisting like botanical calligraphy. Your brush strokes grow steadier with each swirl. You develop a rhythm. Left arc, right hook, taper. Again, again. At some point, it becomes meditative. That is, until the merchant shows up unannounced. He walks in, gestures broadly, and says, "The leaves should be grapier." You blink. Grapier? He nods, very sure of himself. Like grapes, more grape-like. You are not trained in grape psychology, but you nod. Later, you add some grape-shaped swirls and a few curling tendrils. He beams. Perfect. You smile and wonder how many Renaissance commissions were quietly saved by adding vaguely grape-adjacent decorations. Fun fact, background elements in Renaissance paintings, trees, clouds, little dogs peeing on columns, were often assigned to apprentices. They became experts in supporting scenery, which is a polite way of saying everything no one will look at first. Historians still argue whether some of these apprentices influenced the final pieces more than the masters admitted. You suspect the answer is obvious. The rest of your evening is spent cleaning brushes. The good ones, the bad ones, the ones so frayed they might be better suited for chimney sweeping. As you rinse the bristles, you remember your tree again. It wasn't perfect. The branches were a little stiff, but it looked alive, and that matters. After supper, you sit by the back window with a scrap of parchment and draw, just for yourself. No saints, no commissions, just a scene from your imagination. A crooked house, a moonlit street, a tiny dog running for reasons unknown. It feels like breathing. Lorenzo peers over your shoulder. "Why's the dog so angry?" "Maybe it knows something," you reply. He nods. "Fair." You tuck the drawing away. It'll probably get crushed, or stained, or stolen. But for now, it's yours. Before bed, you pass the workshop one last time. The panels stand silently, drying in their frames. Your tree is there, steady and quiet. And you wonder, just for a moment, if someone centuries from now will look at that background, barely visible, and feel the care in every brushstroke. If they'll say, "This part feels real." You're not the star, but you're in the picture, and that means something. You learn that deadlines in the Renaissance studio aren't guidelines. They're doomsday clocks. And this week, the bell is tolling. The church commission must be finished by Sunday. Today is Wednesday. The Virgin still has no hands. One cherub is missing half a face. A donkey in the nativity scene looks more like a confused loaf of bread than a noble beast of burden. Tension wraps around the studio like a damp cloak. No one speaks above a whisper. No one eats without a brush still in hand. Even Lorenzo has stopped making jokes. That's when you know it's bad. You're put on highlight duty. This is not a compliment. It means you're doing the last-minute fiddly bits. The gleams in eyes, the final glints of light on halos, the shadows beneath robes. It's like trying to frost a cake that's already halfway out the door. Your tools? A thin brush, a cracked palette, and 4 hours of sleep. The robe you're assigned to highlight is deep blue, lapis lazuli, no less. And every stroke you add must shimmer just right without muddying the richness. You hold your breath with each line, each curve of light. Maestro passes behind you and mutters, "Don't gild the dirt." You don't ask. You know what he means. Subtlety, precision, don't overdo it. And of course, just as you finish your section, an apprentice behind you sneezes. Right onto the drying panel. A fine mist of nasal disaster sparkles in the lamplight. No one moves. No one even breathes. Then Maestro says, quietly, coldly, "You. Fix it." He's looking at you. You step forward and assess the damage. It's not disastrous, but it's enough. The sneeze landed right on St. Joseph's knee. You dab it gently, lift the worst of it, and use a dry brush to pull pigment back into shape. Then, just to distract the eye, you add a shadow. Subtle. Software. It works. Maestro doesn't say anything, but he doesn't take your brush away either. By evening, you're brushing gold into tiny carved borders around a panel frame. Not leaf this time, just paint with flecks of real gold in it. The shimmer catches the candlelight. Your eyes hurt, your back aches, your stomach growls, but the border gleams like it means it. Dinner is rushed. Beans and hard bread. You chew with one hand and sketch with the other, planning your layout for the next morning. You dream in outlines now, everything reduced to shapes and shadows and tone. Late that night, the master calls the entire studio together. You gather in a semicircle around the drying panels. He walks down the line, hands behind his back, saying nothing. Finally, he turns to face you all and says, "You will finish this. You must." It's not a pep talk. It's a statement of war. The next 2 days are a blur. You sleep in shifts. You eat standing up. You paint until your wrist clicks. You scrape dried paint from under your nails with a sliver of wood. You add a shadow beneath a sheep's hoof that you're not sure even exists in scripture, but it balances the composition. You're no longer thinking. You're doing. At one point, someone collapses, just drops, mid-stroke. No one panics. He's fine. They lay him on a bench and keep working. Fun fact, many Renaissance apprentices learned to paint faster than they thought humanly possible. Deadlines were brutal. Patrons were demanding. And the honor of the studio rode on punctual perfection. Historians still argue whether these time constraints damaged artistic integrity or honed it. Your wrists vote damaged. Your eyes say honed. On Sunday morning, the panel is packed and ready to deliver. You all line up and carry it through the streets like a sacred relic. Townsfolk watch as the altarpiece, St. Catherine, radiant and triumphant, is carried to the church. Children point. One woman crosses herself. You're not allowed inside for the installation. Only Maestro and the senior apprentices go in. You wait outside, feet aching, heart thudding. When he finally returns, he nods once. They're pleased. A sigh ripples through the group. No cheers. Just a long, deep, collective exhale. Back at the studio, Maestro does something no one expects. He pours wine. Real wine. For you. You take a sip, and it tastes like reward. Like paint, and sweat, and satisfaction. You go to bed that night in your usual straw pile, but your dreams are brighter. Not because the work is done, but because you did it. And tomorrow? How's the weather been lately where you are? Has it been helping you sleep better, or making it harder? You get to do it again. Patron Day, again. But this time, it's not just some minor merchant with a fondness for grape-shaped leaves. Number today, it's nobility. Word spreads fast in the studio. A duke, a real one, with a beard trimmed like architecture and boots polished by someone whose entire job is polishing boots, is coming to commission a portrait. Maestro is unusually silent this morning, not brooding, calculating. He paces the room like a general inspecting troops before a battle. Brushes are arranged like weapons, canvases primed and stacked. Every apprentice is ordered to wear clean tunics. Well, clean, meaning not visibly dipped in pigment. You scrub your hands until your knuckles sting. No one wants to meet a duke with madder red under their nails. The hour approaches. A bell chimes from the nearby convent. Then, hooves on stone, a carriage, voices, and perfume. So much perfume. It wafts into the studio ahead of the man himself, who enters wrapped in layers of velvet and lace and very expensive opinions. He doesn't greet the master first. He points at the largest canvas and says, "That's the kind of face I want. Strong, like Caesar, but with more cheekbone." You're not sure what that means. Maestro simply nods. "Yes, my lord." The Duke turns and begins examining everything. Paintings, tools, you. You try to avoid his gaze, but it lands on you like a fishhook. "This one paints?" he asks. Maestro answers carefully. "Still learning, but promising." You're both flattered and terrified. You nod. Say nothing. The Duke grins. "Then let the boy sketch me." Your stomach drops into your shoes. The next 10 minutes are a blur. You're handed a charcoal stick and a board. The Duke sits, no, poses, in a chair brought in specially for the occasion. He rests a hand on his chin, thinks he's Marcus Aurelius clearly. You begin to draw, slowly, carefully, mapping the planes of his face, the tilt of the nose, the bushy brows that seem to be engaged in a mutiny against his forehead. He doesn't sit still. Keeps asking, "Do I look fierce? Or should I turn this way?" You keep nodding politely while adjusting your lines. Maestro watches from across the room with unreadable eyes. Finally, you step back. The sketch isn't great, but it's not bad either. The Duke peers at it, frowns, then laughs. "I look like my uncle. He was hung for treason." Pause. "I like it." And just like that, the studio lands a major commission. Maestro clasps your shoulder as the Duke leaves. Not hard, just enough pressure to say, "Well done, but don't let it go to your head." Later, as you clean up, the other apprentices buzz with questions. Lorenzo elbows you. "You're famous now. Duke's favorite doodler." You grin. "Better than Turnip Boy." You like that nickname. You didn't. No one did. As the week unfolds, the studio is consumed with preparations for the Duke's portrait. Fabrics are ordered, sketches refined, colors discussed in hushed tones. You're allowed to mix the underpainting pigments, ochres, lead whites, some green earth for toning the skin. Fun fact, Renaissance artists didn't paint skin tones all rosy from the start. They layered colors, greens, grays, even blues, under the flesh to create realism. It's a slow, careful process that makes people look alive, and also vaguely unwell before it all comes together. Historians still argue whether this layering technique was a science or just a happy accident refined over generations. Either way, it works. Meanwhile, you're also asked to make a copy of your original Duke sketch for practice. You draw it again, and again. You begin to understand his face in a way that's almost unsettling. The mole by his ear, the slight puffiness around the eyes, the beard that's trying to hide a double chin, and failing. You begin to realize something else too. You're getting fast. What used to take you an hour now takes 20 minutes. And it's better, cleaner, more confident. You watch your hands sometimes and wonder when they became someone else's. Someone skilled, capable, professional. At night, the studio is quiet. Most apprentices collapse early, but you sit by the window again, sketching by candlelight. Not the Duke, not saints. Just a scene. Two apprentices whispering. The master brushing a canvas. A cat curled by the fire. Life as it is. Walang halos. No drama. Just truth. You tuck the sketch away before anyone sees. It's yours. A reminder that even when you're drawing the powerful, you're still grounded in the quiet corners of the workshop. In sweat and pigment and humble things. In people. and in the small, unseen moments that give the grand ones meaning. The Renaissance feels far away, but sometimes, doesn't it seem like we're not so different from them? By now, you've learned how to tell what kind of day it will be by the sound of the studio door. A calm, steady creak? Normal chaos, the kind you've gotten used to. A loud slam followed by silence? Trouble. Today, it's the second kind. You look up from mixing pigment to see Maestro entering, eyes sharp, jaw tight. He walks to the corner and uncovers a canvas. Not one of his, yours, or so you thought. It's a copy of a saint's hand. You recognize it immediately. It's the same one you traced a dozen times last month. But now, it looks suspiciously familiar. Too familiar. The lines are yours. The same stroke, the same pressure. But you didn't paint this version. Your heart drops. You glance sideways at Lorenzo. He doesn't meet your eye. The studio is quiet. Maestro picks up the canvas, turns it slowly. "This," he says, "is a forgery." Everyone freezes. Then, his gaze lands on Lorenzo. "I taught you better than to pass off someone else's work." You barely process the words before Lorenzo is speaking. Fast, defensive. "It wasn't finished. He left the sketch out. And I thought, but it doesn't matter. In the studio, trust is as valuable as gold leaf. Once it's scratched, it never shines the same way again." Maestro sighs, then points toward the door. "Go cool your head. You're not to touch a brush for a week." Lorenzo slinks out. No yelling, no tears, just shame. The rest of the day, the atmosphere is off kilter. Whispers flutter behind brushes. You try to focus, but your mind drifts. You've always known rivalry existed here, but this is the first time it's landed so close to you. Later, you find your sketch pad missing. Your breath catches. You tear through your things. Nothing. It's gone. You suspect who took it. You suspect why. But there's no proof. Instead, you grab fresh parchment and start again. You redraw every scene, every hand, every quiet corner of the workshop you captured before. And maybe you draw a little faster now, a little sharper. There's a fire inside you. You didn't ask for it, but it's here now. That evening, the other apprentices tiptoe around you. One slips you a half loaf of bread. Another, a quiet nod. Solidarity in silence. But not everyone is so neutral. You catch someone sketching in the corner. At first, you think nothing of it. But then you look closer. The sketch is of you. Mid-pose, hunched over your drawing board. You raise an eyebrow. The sketcher grins. Just keeping an eye on the competition. You smile. It's the first real one all day. Fun fact, Renaissance workshops were known for their intense rivalries. Some apprentices spied for other studios. Some sabotaged work. Some, like Michelangelo and Da Vinci, grew up under the same sky and still found ways to loathe each other with breathtaking flair. Historians still argue how much of the tension was personal versus professional. But inside these walls, it feels like both. The week crawls on. Lorenzo returns to work, quieter, more careful. He doesn't speak to you. You don't need him to. But one night, he leaves a scrap of paper on your cot. It's your missing sketch pad. Everything's intact. No explanation. Just a note scrawled in charcoal. You're better anyway. You don't tell anyone. You don't even respond. But the next day, you pass him a brush he dropped, and neither of you speaks. Some things fix themselves. Slowly. Quietly. That afternoon, the studio buzzes with new energy. Word has spread. Another studio is trying to poach the Duke's commission. They sent a spy, it said. Someone who visited as a client, but spent more time eyeing the workshop layout than the art. Maestro's solution? Work harder. Work faster. He divides the apprentices into pairs. You're partnered with the same boy who drew you. You take figures, he says. You, backgrounds. I want a full composition sketch by tomorrow morning. The assignment crackles like lightning in your chest. You haven't collaborated before. You sketch late into the night, side by side. He draws a grieving angel. You place her in a moonlit courtyard. He adds wind to her robes. You scatter leaves at her feet. It becomes a duet, a kind of quiet dance in graphite and ink. When you finally sleep, you dream of wings and shadows and a face you've never seen, but can't stop drawing. And in the morning, when Maestro examines your sketch, he simply nods once. Frame it. A sketch. Framed. The apprentices exchange glances. That doesn't happen. But today, it does. Today, rivalry became rhythm. And you, quietly, steadily, are rising. There's a phrase you hear whispered often in the studio. The master's hand is many hands. At first, you think it's just some poetic nonsense apprentices mutter to themselves after 12 hours of brushwork and 3 hours of sleep. But today, you finally see what it really means. Maestro begins a new canvas, a portrait for a rich widow who insists her nose is entirely too Roman. She's paid in advance, of course, always a dangerous sign. The underdrawing begins with him. His hand, steady, confident, places the first marks. A curve here, a guideline there. The bones of the face rising from the blankness like ghosts. His lines are elegant, swift, and then he steps back. Finish the hair, he says to one apprentice. Block the robes, to another. Hands, to you. You freeze. But he doesn't repeat it. He just turns away, as if the decision has already been made, and your hesitation is the only surprise. You approach the canvas with reverence and terror in equal measure. You can still see the faint construction lines. The hand is folded in the lap, graceful, half-turned. Not expressive, not dramatic, just present, which makes it harder. You load your brush and begin. First, the shape, then the shadow, then the gentle curve of knuckles softened by good living and powdered gloves. You add the tiniest blue vein beneath the skin, a whisper of light across the middle knuckle. Every stroke, deliberate. Not yours, but part of something greater. It takes 2 hours. You step back, and you can't tell where your work ends and another apprentice's begins. It's seamless. This is the illusion of the master's hand. The one signature everyone will see. The one name etched beneath the frame. But behind it, yours. The hair was done by a girl who sings to herself when she works. The robes by a boy who can mix 15 shades of shadow with 3 pigments and a sneeze. The background, that was you last year, before you were allowed to paint hands. Fun fact, many Renaissance masterpieces were team efforts. The master painted the focal point, usually a face or a gesture, but everything else, from drapery to clouds to halos, came from apprentices, often dozens. Sometimes entire sections were outsourced to other studios. Historians still debate how much credit masters truly deserved. Some say they orchestrated like conductors. Others argue they simply signed the painting last and collected the coin. But here, now, as you step back from the widow's hand, you realize it doesn't matter, because what you've painted today is in a real portrait, one that will hang in a real house, that someone will look at and admire, and your brushwork is in it. You, even if no one ever knows. Later, you help hang the canvas in the drying racks. You catch yourself watching the hand you painted, checking it, rechecking, imagining the widow's reaction. Beautiful, she might say. Or maybe she'll point to the nose and complain again. That feels more likely. At lunch, the studio hums with soft chatter. Everyone's talking about the next commission, a private devotional panel. Smaller, more intimate, but high profile. You catch whispers about a chance to work on the background again. You don't say anything, but your heart perks up. That afternoon, Maestro gathers you all for something unusual, a walk. Outside, the sunlight hits your face like a forgotten friend. You squint, disoriented. Paint-stained hands shield your eyes. You shuffle down cobbled streets with the others, trailing the master like a caravan of sleep-deprived ghosts. He brings you to the cathedral, not to pray, to look. You all stand before a massive fresco, chipped and faded, but still alive. This, he says, was done in 30 days, with 12 apprentices. You all stare. The scale, the movement, the sheer amount of work. You feel tiny, and also, oddly, capable. If 12 could do this, what could you do? On the way back, no one speaks. Not because they're tired, though they are, but because something quiet and heavy has settled in each of you. Ambition. That night, Maestro pulls you aside. You'll begin sketching robes tomorrow, he says. Just like that. No explanation. No congratulations. Just opportunity. You nod. And he nods back. The studio is dark when you lie down on your mat. Your sketch pad under your head like a makeshift pillow. You stare at the beams above, where candle smoke has left faint halos around the knots in the wood. You're still anonymous, still background, but the canvas you touched is drying now, and in the morning, the widow's hands will be yours. I always wondered, if a Renaissance artist lived today, what would they paint first? You haven't slept well in days, not because of noise, not even because of Lorenzo's new habit of muttering Latin phrases in his sleep. No, your dreams are the problem. They've become strange lately, blurred, full of colors and fragments of paintings that don't exist. You dream of hands reaching through panels, faces melting like wax, saints with too many eyes, and a bowl of egg tempera that never runs out, no matter how much you stir. You wake each morning with paint stains already on your arms. You don't even remember putting them there. It's not just you. Everyone's dragging this week. A heavy commission is underway, a private devotional triptych for a noble family who insists on 20 saints, 5 dogs, 2 scenes of martyrdom, and 1 miracle, at minimum, all crammed into 3 panels. And the deadline? 2 weeks. Maestro hasn't slept either. His beard is growing in strange directions. His cloak smells faintly of linseed and stress. He doesn't yell anymore. He just gives orders in short, whispery bursts like a priest delivering a warning. Today, you're tasked with detailing the clouds. Sounds simple. Clouds. But you quickly learn there are clouds, and then there are holy clouds. These must be luminous, weightless, glowing like they've been kissed by angels and sanctioned by the Pope himself. They can't look like mashed potatoes, or steam, or the kinds of clouds that ruin picnics. Number. These clouds are heaven's carpeting. You mix white with a touch of lead tin yellow for warmth, then dab in just enough cobalt to give them shape. You feather the edges gently, whisper the brush across the sky. But something's wrong. They look flat. You try again, this time with less pressure, less certainty, letting the paint suggest the softness rather than forcing it. They come alive. By mid-afternoon, you've painted a sky that breathes. Even Lorenzo peers over and mumbles, "Okay," I'd live there. Small victories. Later, you're asked to prepare a pigment for the angel's robes. You're using cochineal, a crimson dye made from crushed beetles. Tiny insects, dried and ground, then mixed with alum and gum arabic until the red becomes deep enough to make kings weep. You stir beetles into brilliance, and you think to yourself, how strange that the divine is often built from the grotesque. Fun fact, some of the richest pigments in Renaissance art came from surprising sources. Lapis from mines in Afghanistan, green earth from volcanic ash, black from charred animal bones, and red from insects. Historians still argue whether artists fully understood the trade networks behind their materials, or if they simply accepted that beauty required complicated sourcing. As you carry the crimson pigment across the studio, your hand slips. A single drop splatters onto your sketch, right on the face of a kneeling saint. You stare. The red blooms across the page like blood. You mutter a curse, not one that would get you kicked out of the church, but close. You reach for a rag, but stop. What if you grab your brush, draw the red downward, angle the head, shade the eyes? Suddenly, it's no longer a saint in prayer. It's a martyr, wounded, bleeding, beautiful. You've accidentally made it better. You glance around. No one saw, but you smile anyway. Your mistake has become a miracle. The rest of the day passes in a blur. You sketch, you grind, you glaze, you catch yourself humming. You haven't hummed in weeks. Later, you're sent to the cellar to fetch more wood panels. The air down there is thick with dust and mildew. Cobwebs cling to your arms. You trip over a stool, knock over a bundle of drawings. And then, in the corner, you find something strange. A half-finished painting, old, dusty, cracked, but beautiful. A Madonna, unfinished, her eyes wide, her lips partway formed, as if she's just about to say something. You bring it upstairs quietly. Maestro sees it, freezes. He says, "That was mine. Years ago." No one speaks. He walks over, brushes dust from the edge. "I couldn't finish it." "Why not?" you ask. He shrugs. "The hands were wrong." You glance. The hands are yours now, the kind you could paint in your sleep. He looks at you. Not directly, just near you, and says, "You finish it." It's not an order. It's a passing of weight. Later that evening, as the candles burn low and the other apprentices snore in their corners, you sit before the Madonna. Your brush is steady. Her hands will be gentle. And finally, she will speak. There's always one apprentice who just shines. He's not older than you. In fact, he might be younger. His hands are always clean, somehow. His lines are elegant. His drapery flows. His saints look like they've already seen heaven and come back with better posture. His name is Pietro. You hate how good he is. Not in a bitter, petty way. Not exactly. More in a, why do his angels look effortless, while mine have the expression of someone stuck in traffic kind of way. Pietro arrived 2 months ago. Quiet, pale, wore a coat too fine for an apprentice. Rumor says his uncle is a bishop. Another says his father paid triple to get him placed in the studio. Doesn't matter. His work speaks louder than any family name. Today, you're both assigned to the same panel, a pair of saints, equal in size, placement, and detail. A silent contest. Maestro gives the order without looking at either of you. You take the left. He takes the right. You glance at the panel. Pietro is already mixing colors. Probably colors you've never even dreamed of using for skin tones. You start sketching. Lines first. A calm jawline. Hands clasped in prayer. A robe that falls in careful folds. You make your saint humble, grounded, human. Pietro's, radiant. The face glows. The eyes look upward, full of revelation, and maybe even a little smugness. You fight the urge to peek too often. Instead, you paint, layer after layer. You make your colors subtle, underpainting in green, building up warmth slowly with transparent glazes. You've learned to be patient. Pietro works faster, flashier. By midday, you both step back. The studio is quiet. You glance from your saint to his. Yours feels honest. A man who lived, suffered, prayed because he needed to, not because it made for a good painting. Pietro's is stunning, ethereal, the kind of saint who never broke a sweat. And yet, yours feels closer. Maestro approaches, looks at both, says nothing, walks away, which might be the best compliment either of you could get. Still, the comparison eats at you. Later that afternoon, while cleaning brushes, you ask Pietro, "How long have you been painting?" He shrugs. "Since I was 8. You nod. That makes sense. He adds, "I never liked it much. But my father says I have the hand for it." You blink. "You don't like painting?" He shrugs again. "Not like you do." There's no malice in his tone, just observation. You don't know how to respond, because the truth is, you do like it. You love it. Even when your back aches. Even when the pigments stain your skin and make you cough. Even when no one notices the little detail you snuck into the background of a saint's robe. A cat curled under a table, a leaf shaped like a heart. You like the way paint smells. The way it feels to mix just the right hue. The soft tap-tap of brush on wood. The way a figure emerges from nothing, like a memory you didn't know you had. Pietro likes being good at it, but you like the doing. And that might be the difference. Fun fact, some of the most celebrated artists in history were competitive prodigies, people who craved recognition, fame, and patronage. Others were quieter souls who simply couldn't stop creating, even when no one was watching. Historians still argue who left the deeper mark. That night, while others sleep, you go to the unfinished Madonna again, the one Maestro gave you. You add her hands, software outstretched, not in prayer, but in offering. She doesn't look radiant like Pietro's saints. She looks present. You place a tiny bird in one hand, a finch, head tilted. Maestro sees it the next morning. He pauses, then says, "She's listening now." You don't speak, you just nod. The studio moves on, but Pietro lingers. Later, he asks to see your sketch pad. You hesitate, then hand it over. He flips through slowly, eyes sharp. He stops at the page with your Madonna and the finch. After a long pause, he says, "That's good." You manage a small smile. "Thanks." Then he adds, "Better than mine?" You look at him. It's not false modesty, not sarcasm, just truth. And in that moment, you don't hate him. Because maybe there's room for both kinds of artists. The ones who dazzle, and the ones who care. The first time your initials make it into a painting, they're hidden, tucked discreetly into the hem of a saint's robe. A tiny V and C, your name compressed into the smallest corners of the canvas. Not visible to the untrained eye. Not enough to claim credit, but enough that you know it's there. And just as you finish penciling it in, Pietro leans over and whispers, "That's either very bold or very stupid." You smirk. "Can it be both?" He chuckles. "Only if you're lucky." And somehow, this strange half-friendship has solidified. The rivalry has softened into something stranger. Mutual recognition. He's still better at capturing light. You're still better at capturing life. Together, you might just be dangerous. Today, the studio is quiet, not tense, just quiet in that focused, post-deadline way, where everyone has their head down, their hands moving automatically, their minds drifting into the calm rhythm of repetition. You're assigned background figures again. 3 saints, all facing away. Decorative, supportive, not the focal point. At first, you're disappointed. Then you realize something. Background figures are where the real stories live. You get to decide their posture, their quiet expressions, their moment of pause. Are they praying, thinking, watching the central figure with awe, or with something more complicated? You choose subtle reactions, a furrowed brow, a head tilted just so, one hand that almost looks like it's reaching toward the viewer. Maestro passes by and glances at the scene. His eyes linger for a moment. Then he says, "Don't overthink it," which means he noticed, which means you're on the right track. In the afternoon, the studio receives a visitor, not a patron, a rival, Master Giacomo. He's famous for his religious works, known for drama, action, theatrical compositions that make angels look like they're in the middle of a very intense opera. He strides in with his assistants in tow. Their hair is perfect. Their boots are clean. Their faces politely unimpressed. Maestro greets him with a nod. They exchange formalities, praise that sounds like threats, compliments laced with challenge. And then the real reason emerges. He wants to borrow you. Well, not you, specifically, but an apprentice. His studio is behind schedule on a ceiling fresco, and he needs extra hands. The honor, he says, would be shared. You expect Maestro to decline. Instead, he turns to the room, gestures toward you and Pietro, and says, "Take them." Just like that. You pack your tools. Pietro shrugs, clearly curious, and together, you're off to the rival studio. It's like entering another country. Giacomo's space is spotless. Every apprentice works in total silence. The walls are covered in dramatic studies, muscular saints, flaming skies, eyes that seem to follow you from every angle. You're introduced quickly. No one smiles. Your job: help with underpainting the clouds on the ceiling. You look up, and up, and up. The fresco is massive, 30 feet wide. Figures swirl around the sky like they're caught in a celestial storm. Lightning, glory, movement. You're dizzy already. Pietro whistles softly. Ambitious. A senior assistant hands you a scaffold brush. Don't fall. Great start. You climb. Paint. Feather in highlights. Soften edges. You're good at clouds now. You know how to make them breathe. Pietro paints beside you. Faster than anyone. Effortless. But today, you feel it too. The rhythm. The hum. You're moving with the ceiling. With the space. With the light. During a break, you and Pietro sneak a peek at Giacomo's sketches. They're technically perfect, but something about them feels detached. Beautiful, yes, but cold. Too much theater, Pietro says. Not enough story. You nod. By nightfall, you're back in your own studio. Your fingers ache. Your back feels like it aged 20 years. But your mind buzzes. Giacomo's studio taught you something. Perfection isn't everything. You need soul. You need messiness. You need the brushstroke that almost ruins the painting, but somehow saves it. The next morning, you return to your background saints. One now has a scar above his eye. Another clutches a folded piece of parchment. Tiny details, hints of history, of story. Pietro walks past, sees what you've done, and smirks. You're sneaking narrative into the margins again. Someone has to, you say. And maybe that's your place. Not the central figure, not the glowing Madonna, but the story told in the corner. the foot turned away, the eye that watches but says nothing. Fun fact, some Renaissance artists were known for hiding stories in the background, like a dog chewing a slipper or a servant asleep during a miracle. These moments made the paintings feel real, alive. Historians still argue whether these were the master's ideas or the apprentice's. You suspect more than a few were your spiritual ancestors. That evening, Maestro calls you over. He points to a small panel, unfinished. "It's yours," he says. "All of it." Your eyes widen. He nods. One figure, your style, your hand, your mistake to make. It's a test, a gift. You stare at the blank panel, your brush hovering. You think about saints, about scarred background figures, about clouds and beetles and rivalries and noses that are too Roman. And then, you begin. The panel is no bigger than a sheet of parchment. A single figure standing in profile with one hand lifted. Not quite in blessing, not quite in farewell. You don't know who this figure is yet. Not a saint, not a client's favorite martyr. Just someone human. You work slowly, not cautiously, but intentionally. You sketch the figure with soft lines, letting the pose emerge as if from fog. You don't start with the face. You've learned better by now. You start with the gesture, the body, the weight. The robe flows naturally, loose at the shoulders, gathered at the waist. The kind of robe someone would wear while walking quietly at dawn, thinking about something too big to name. The face comes later, older, not idealized, not tragic, just present, lined by time, calmer than most saints. You don't even ask Maestro if it should be a biblical subject. He gave you this panel. That means it's yours. You decide it's a pilgrim, not going to or coming from anything grand, just walking, reflecting. You paint for hours, layer after layer. Warm earth tones for the robe, pale flesh built up with green underpaint and translucent reds. You skip the halo. Let the gesture speak instead. Other apprentices glance over. No one comments. But you feel the air shift. Even Pietro watches, then returns to his own sketch without a word. At one point, you add a small satchel to the figure's side, then a faint glimmer of road beneath their feet, just enough to suggest journey, or maybe wandering. You mix the background last. You want something muted, clouded grays with hints of light breaking through, like a memory surfacing. A little cracked wood shows through near the edges. You leave it. Not everything needs to be covered. That night, you sit by the finished panel and stare. You're not proud exactly. You're quiet. Inside your chest, something settles, like a bird folding its wings. When Maestro passes, he says nothing. Just picks up the panel, examines it, and rests it gently on the drying shelf. The next morning, it's hanging on the studio wall. No signature, no frame, but yours. And no one touches it. No one needs to. It's a week later when the letter arrives. An invitation from a distant town, a new patron. They've seen one of Maestro's works, your clouds, to be precise, and they want someone trained in his style. Maestro reads the letter aloud, then hands it to you. "I think you're ready," he says. You blink. The others go quiet, even Pietro. You try to speak. "I'm not..." He cuts you off. "If you wait until you feel ready, you'll die an apprentice." The next day, you pack your things. Brushes, sketches, a few jars of pigments sealed in wax. Pietro slips a rolled-up drawing into your satchel. You open it later. It's the pilgrim you painted, but redrawn in his hand. More graceful, slightly smug. You smile. He's signed it. Don't forget us when your saints start floating. As you step out of the workshop for the last time, the smells hit you. Linseed, charcoal, vinegar, sawdust, egg yolk. You breathe it in. You don't look back. You've left your mark here, in a corner, in a cloud, in a robe's hem, and now you carry it with you. Your own hand, your own stories, your own panel. The road stretches ahead, quiet and pale beneath the early morning light. Your feet move slowly now, as if savoring the stillness. You can still feel the grain of the brush in your fingers, still hear the scratch of charcoal, the soft clink of pigment jars being set down, the way candlelight played across a drying panel. The studio may be behind you, but its rhythm remains. You imagine a quiet room, somewhere in the hills, a window letting in golden light, a blank canvas waiting. You'll stretch the linen yourself. You'll mix the colors slowly. There will be no rush, no masters breathing down your neck, just your thoughts, your hands, your work. And maybe, if you listen closely, the echo of someone sweeping with a lavender broom, the gentle hiss of tempera drying, the laugh of an apprentice over a ruined cloud. All of it is with you now. And maybe, someday, someone will look at your painting, your real one, and pause, not because of the colors, or the fame, or the gold, but because they see something human in the folds of the robe, in the shadow of the hands, and they'll think, someone painted this with care. Someone who once walked a road like yours. Now, your day is done. Let your eyes close. Let the brush fall from your mind. The light is soft now, and the pilgrim rests. Sweet dreams. If this made your night a little calmer, feel free to come back again sometime. I'll be right here.